Eliza Quill, a weary bureaucrat in a government office that regulates nonsense time travel permits, unicorn parking, and misplaced Mondays, alongside whimsical co-workers like rebellious Myra and eccentric Felix. Eliza battles mounting chaos as absurdity begins to defy control. When a faceless auditor threatens to erase all illogic, Eliza must decide whether to preserve order or embrace the creative madness that keeps their world alive. Blending humor, satire, and surreal philosophy, the story explores bureaucracy, imagination, and the fragile balance between logic and lunacy in a world where nonsense is law. The Bureau of Absurd Affairs was not your typical government office. Nestled inconspicuously in a nondescript building on the corner of Anywhere and Nowhere streets, it looked from the outside like any other grey, bureaucratic establishment. Yet inside, fluorescent lights buzzed relentlessly over rows of desks piled high with paperwork that defied common sense. Here, the impossible was not merely tolerated, was licensed, catalogued, and regulated. Eliza Quill arrived promptly at 9 o'clock, her short-cropped dark hair perfectly framing the sharp lines of her glasses. Her fingers were perpetually stained with ink, a testament to a lifetime spent wrestling with paperwork that made less sense with every passing day. Today was no different. The time travel licenses her domain was stacked in towering piles, each a petition for permission to slip through the fabric of time, complete with paradox risk assessments and temporal compliance checklists. Eliza's desk was a microcosm of controlled chaos. A flickering monitor displayed an erratic timeline, occasionally glitching with sudden flashes of dates that shouldn't exist or moments that seemed to loop endlessly. She tapped her pen against the form of a Mr. Hargrove, who requested to revisit his yesterday twice over, a request that had already been denied thrice, but somehow kept resurfacing. "Time is the substance I am made of," Eliza murmured, quoting from a dusty tome of absurdist literature she kept hidden beneath her keyboard. "And yet, it's a substance we're all perpetually out of." She allowed a brief, wry smile before returning to her work. Across the room, Harold Pindle hovered anxiously over a stack of unicorn parking permits. His slicked-back grey hair was immaculate, but the ill-fitting suit he wore betrayed his nervous energy. His oversized spectacles magnified his eyes as he obsessively scanned forms, correcting colleagues for commas out of place and signatures that didn't quite match the strict bureaucratic standards. His world was one of rules, order, and an unshakable belief in the sanctity of procedure. "Permit 452B is invalid," Harold snapped, pointing his finger at a form Myra Tock had just submitted. Myra, the junior clerk with brightly colored hair and clothes that clashed in a riot of mismatched patterns, barely looked up from her sketchbook, where she doodled creatures that seemed to leak from the very edges of reality. "Relax, Harold," she chirped. "A little imagination never hurt anyone. Besides, I think this unicorn deserves a break." Harold's face tightened. Rules are rules. Without them, this bureau would descend into chaos. Isn't that the point? Mira winked, flashing a grin that was equal parts mischief and earnestness. The tension between them was palpable, a dance of ideologies that played out daily amid the hum of the office's malfunctioning absurdity machines. At the back of the room, Felix Grimble, an archivist whose eccentricity was as colorful as his bow ties, bumbled through a mountain of papers. His spectacles perched precariously low on his nose. He muttered to himself as he searched for a misplaced file that had somehow wandered into the realm of lost Tuesdays. "Ah, here it is," Felix exclaimed, triumphantly holding aloft a crumpled permit. His cheerfulness was a balm to the otherwise stifling atmosphere. The receptionist, Greta Loop, filtered a stream of outlandish requests, Mondays. unauthorized time loops, and the occasional complaint about unicorns parking too long in no parking zones. She was the first line of defense against the flood of nonsense that threatened to overwhelm the Bureau's fragile order. As the morning wore on, subtle signs of disruption began to surface. The time travel licenses flickered with unexplained anomalies. Unicorns appeared in unauthorized zones, despite meticulous permit checks. Misplaced Mondays seemed to pile up inexplicably, defying all attempts at regulation. Eliza noticed the glitches first, a sense of unease creeping beneath her pragmatic exterior. She exchanged worried glances with Harold, whose usual confidence was giving way to apprehension. Myra, for her part, seemed invigorated by the chaos, her sketches growing more elaborate and wild. "Something's off," Eliza said quietly to herself as she stared at the flickering timeline. "And it's not just the usual nonsense." As the day closed, the clerks gathered briefly around Felix's cluttered desk. His jovial demeanor masked a seriousness that belied his forgetful nature. "We need to keep a close eye on these disturbances," Eliza said, her voice firm but tinged with uncertainty. "The balance between order and absurdity is more delicate than ever." Harold nodded slowly, his rigid belief shaken but not broken. Myra's eyes sparkled with a mixture of excitement and defiance. The Bureau of Absurd Affairs was alive with possibility and peril. As Eliza returned to her desk, she whispered another quote, almost to herself. "The only way to make sense of nonsense is to live within it." And with that, the dance between order and absurdity began anew, setting the stage for the bewildering journey ahead. But beneath the surface, something darker stirred, a shadow that threatened the very fabric of the Bureau's peculiar universe. For now, it remained hidden, lurking quietly in the fluorescent buzz. And so the day ended, not with resolution, but with questions. The kind that only nonsense could provoke, and only the Bureau of Absurd Affairs could hope to answer. Eliza Quill's day began like any other in the fluorescent-lit maze of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs. The hum of malfunctioning absurdity machines filled the stale air, punctuated by the rhythmic clatter of stamping permits and the low murmur of bureaucrats navigating the impossible. At her desk, a clutter of papers, pens, and half-empty coffee cups surrounded her like a fortress against the madness she willingly managed. Today, a particularly perplexing permit lay before her, a time travel license that shimmered and flickered as if caught in a temporal storm. The document's edges quivered, the ink twisting into new forms with every blink. "A paradox in the making," she muttered, adjusting her glasses and tapping the permit with a cautious finger. "If this license activates, we risk unraveling the very fabric of our timeline." Across the room, Harold Pindle was engaged in his own ritualistic battle. His oversized spectacles perched precariously on his nose as he methodically stamped unicorn parking permits, his movements precise and deliberate. Nearby, Myra Tock leaned over her desk, her brightly colored hair a stark contrast to the drab office environment. She doodled an irreverent unicorn wearing sunglasses, the creature lounging atop a pile of permits with a cheeky grin. "Miss Tock," Harold's voice cracked like a whip. "These permits must be handled with the utmost seriousness. The regulations are clear. Unicorns may only park in designated zones, no exceptions." Mira glanced up, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "But Harold, sometimes the rules need a little flexibility. What harm could a unicorn parking a block away do? Maybe it just wants a latte." Harold's face reddened. "Rules are rules. Without them, chaos reigns." Eliza sighed, rubbing her temple. The clash was as inevitable as the nonsensical phenomena they regulated. Yet today, the absurdity felt different, more volatile. The time travel permit in her hands pulsed erratically, and the air around the unicorn parking area seemed charged with a faint, magical disturbance. She rose and made her way to the maintenance bay, where Nina Voss was hunched over a console, tools scattered around her like a nest of mechanical birds. The absurdity machines responsible for stabilizing temporal permits were flickering wildly, emitting soft beeps and occasional sparks. "Nina," Eliza called softly. "The glitches are getting worse. The paradoxes, they're bleeding through the system." Nina nodded without looking up. "I've been trying to recalibrate the temporal dampeners, but something's interfering at a fundamental level. It's not just a machine fault anymore." Back in the main office, Felix Grimble was lost in a sea of paperwork, his colorful bow tie askew as he muttered incoherently. Despite his cheerful demeanor, today bore a hint of unease. His fingertips traced the edges of a file labeled "Misplaced Mondays," though his mind was distracted by the anomalies creeping into the time travel and unicorn permits. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed from the parking permit station. Myra and Harold turned sharply to see a unicorn, impossibly iridescent and yawning, standing in an unauthorized zone. Harold's face twisted in horror as he reached for his stamp. "This is a direct violation," he declared, stamping the air with frustration. Myra, however, knelt beside the creature, her eyes softening. "Maybe it's just tired of the rules," she whispered. "Maybe it's trying to remind us that nonsense doesn't always fit neatly into boxes." Eliza returned to her desk, the flickering permit now pulsing like a heartbeat. "If the phenomena we regulate start to defy our regulations," she mused aloud, "what becomes of the Bureau?" Harold's rigid posture softened momentarily as he considered her words. Even he could feel the cracks forming in the foundation of their orderly world. The day wore on with mounting tension. Eliza wrestled with the paradoxical permit, consulting Nina intermittently. Mira continued her quiet rebellion through doodles and whispered conversations, challenging Harold's dogma at every turn. Felix's eccentric investigations hinted at deeper disturbances, and Harold's anxiety grew, the specter of losing control looming large. As the office lights dimmed, Eliza penned a note to her supervisors, temporal anomalies escalating. Recommend immediate review of permit protocols and machine diagnostics. Potential risk to bureau stability. Mira glanced over her shoulder, sketchbook open to a new drawing, a unicorn tangled in red tape, smiling wryly. "Maybe the nonsense is trying to tell us something," she said softly. Eliza nodded, a flicker of reluctant hope stirring beneath her frustration. The Bureau was unraveling, but perhaps, in that unraveling, lay the first threads of genuine absurdity worth embracing. And as the last permit was stamped and the final form filed, the office settled into an uneasy silence, the impossible quietly waiting to be understood. The question lingered, unspoken but unavoidable. How does one regulate nonsense when nonsense refuses to be regulated? The answer, Eliza suspected, would come not from the rulebooks, but from the chaos themselves. And that was a journey she was only beginning to accept. The office of the Bureau of Absurd Affairs was awash in the soft glow of flickering fluorescent lights, casting long shadows across desks cluttered with forms stamped in triplicate and peculiar trinkets that defied categorization. Amid the hum of antiquated air conditioning units and the muffled clatter of typewriters, some digital, some stubbornly analog Miratok sat at her desk, the epicenter of a mounting crisis, misplaced Mondays. The phenomenon wasn't new, but recently the number of complaints, requests, and frantic inquiries had surged alarmingly. Days were vanishing, swapped, or simply appearing in the wrong week, causing chaos not only in calendars, but in the very rhythm of the city's life. Myra, with her electric blue hair pulled back into a messy bun and her signature mismatched socks peeking beneath the desk, was in her element. Her sketchbook lay open, pages alive with swirling lines and fantastical creatures, some with 7 eyes, others with clock hands for Limsic, a whimsical manifestation of the Bureau's ongoing battle against temporal nonsense. "Look at this," she murmured to no one in particular, tapping a pencil against the page as she doodled a creature she called a Monday misplacer, a tiny imp-like being with a mischievous grin and a pocket watch forever set to never. Around her, the office buzzed with a peculiar mix of tension and absurdity. Across the room, Felix Grimble shuffled through piles of yellowing files. His colorful bow tie bobbed with every hurried step, and his spectacles slid precariously down his nose. Felix was the Bureau's archivist, a former magician turned paperwork wizard whose eccentric methods often raised eyebrows but rarely failed to deliver results. Today, his mission was daunting: locate the elusive files on the most recent wave of misplaced Mondays before they vanished into the bureaucratic ether. "Ah, here we go," Felix whispered triumphantly, clutching a folder that seemed to hum faintly with temporal energy. He flipped it open, pages fluttering as if caught in a breeze from another dimension. "These misplaced Mondays are more slippery than a greased otter on a water." Mira glanced over, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of amusement and admiration. "Only you would compare temporal anomalies to otters, Felix." Felix grinned, adjusting his bow tie. One must find joy in the little things when dealing with cosmic nonsense. Meanwhile, Eliza Quill stood by the window, her fingers stained with ink from a half-finished report. Her short dark hair framed a face marked by quiet determination and a hint of weariness. She was the lead clerk overseeing time travel licenses, a position that demanded a level of pragmatism, often at odds with the Bureau's inherent absurdity. Yet, even she couldn't ignore the creeping sensation that the misplaced Mondays were symptomatic of a deeper fracture in the system. She murmured under her breath, quoting an obscure piece of absurdist literature: "When the day misplaces itself, the mind must follow, lest reality unravel like a poorly knit sweater." The words felt eerily prophetic. In the meeting room, the atmosphere was thick with debate. Clerks gathered around a cluttered table, papers strewn about like fallen leaves. Mira had pinned several of her sketches to the cork border, colorful juxtaposition of whimsy against the drab beige walls. "These aren't just doodles," she insisted, gesturing animatedly. "They're representations. If we can understand the creatures symbolizing these misplaced days, maybe we can predict where they'll turn up next." Harold Pindle, the Bureau's ever-anxious supervisor for unicorn parking permits, cleared his throat nervously from the back. "Ms. Tack, with all due respect, we cannot base policy on fanciful drawings. We need data, regulations, and adherence to procedure." The room tensed. Myra's eyes flashed, but before she could respond, Felix interjected, "Sometimes, Harold, the data hides in the chaos. It's our job to find it, no matter how messy the trail." Eliza nodded thoughtfully, breaking her silence. "Felix has a point. The misplaced Mondays aren't just clerical errors. They're symptoms of a system stretched too thin. We need to rethink how we approach this, not just with rules but with imagination." The debate continued, voices rising and falling like the unpredictable rhythm of the very days they sought to regulate. Outside, the city moved obliviously, its inhabitants grumbling about lost appointments and confused schedules. As the day wore on, Myra returned to her sketches, adding intricate details to her Monday misplacer creatures. Felix, armed with his newly found files, began to cross-reference patterns. Eliza drafted a plan to convene a special task force, blending the creative and the procedural. The chapter closes with the Bureau poised on the brink of transformation, caught between the relentless grind of bureaucracy and the wild, untamable spirit of nonsense. As Myra's pen hovered over the page, she whispered, "Maybe misplaced Mondays aren't a problem to fix, but a puzzle to embrace." Outside the window, the city clock struck an ambiguous hour. Neither Tuesday nor Monday, but something altogether new, an invitation to reconsider the very nature of time itself. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting a jittery glow over the rows of cubicles that made up the Bureau of Absurd Affairs. It was just past mid-morning, and the usual hum of copiers and the clatter of typewriters formed a discordant symphony in the stale air. Yet beneath the mundane sounds lay an undercurrent of unease, as if the very walls themselves sensed the shifting tides within the bureau. Eliza Quill sat at her desk, her eyes scanning the latest batch of time travel license applications. The forms were as bizarre as ever. One applicant requested permission for a temporal detour to the 17th century to attend a sorcerer's convention. Another sought to reverse a regrettable decision made 3 Tuesdays ago. Her fingers, perpetually stained with ink from scribbling notes and corrections, hovered over the keyboard, hesitating as the terminal flickered with unusual glitches. A sudden temporal paradox had been detected in the system, a ripple threatening to unravel the delicate balance the Bureau maintained. She sighed, muttering under her breath a line from a forgotten absurdist play, "When clocks wear hats, time itself takes a holiday." It was a wry reminder of the absurdity she managed daily, a shield against the creeping cynicism that threatened to swallow her whole. Across the room, Harold Pindle was a stark contrast to Eliza's calm pragmatism. His slicked-back grey hair gleamed under the flickering lights, and his oversized spectacles slid down his nose as he obsessively sorted through unicorn parking permits. The permits were color-coded, numbered, and stamped with seals of genuine magical origin. Harold's fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted a stack, his mind racing with fears of overbooking and unauthorized magical vehicles infringing on designated zones. He glanced nervously toward the hallway. Earlier, he had caught a glimpse of a man in a black suit, faceless behind a mirrored mask, gliding silently past the office entrance. The sight had unsettled him profoundly. Who was this shadowy visitor? What did his presence signify? His thoughts spiraled into worst-case scenarios, each more alarming than the last. "Harold," Eliza called softly, noticing his distracted state. "Focus on the permits, not shadows." Harold forced a tight smile but could not shake the feeling of impending doom. The Bureau's fragile order was under threat, and he feared his efforts might not be enough to hold the line. Meanwhile, Miratok, the junior clerk, known for her whimsical approach to the bizarre, was absent from her usual spot. Her mismatched clothes and bright hair were missing from the office today, and her sketchbook lay closed on her desk. The usual lightness she brought to the Bureau was noticeably absent, as if the atmosphere itself weighed heavier in her absence. The break room was a sanctuary of sorts, dimly lit and cluttered with mismatched chairs and a perpetually humming coffee machine. Here, Eliza, Harold, and a few others gathered during short breaks, sharing quiet moments away from the relentless paperwork. Today, the conversations were subdued, punctuated by uneasy silences and furtive glances toward the corridor. "Did you see him?" Harold whispered, the auditor. Eliza nodded, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "Yes. A reminder that our world is not as safe as we pretend." "He represents everything we fight against," Harold muttered. "Cold logic, order without imagination, the end of nonsense. Eliza's eyes darkened with a mix of frustration and resolve. And yet, we cannot dismiss him. If the balance tips too far, chaos consumes us. But if order crushes absurdity, creativity dies. Their conversation was cut short by the sudden malfunction of a nearby absurdity machine, a device responsible for regulating misplaced Mondays. The machine emitted a high-pitched whine before sputtering to silence, sending a ripple of concern through the office. Eliza stood abruptly, her mind racing. We need to investigate. This is no ordinary glitch. Something bigger is stirring. Harold reluctantly agreed, the fear in his eyes mingling with a reluctant determination. The auditor's shadow loomed large, but the bureau's clerks were not yet ready to surrender their peculiar world. As the day wore on, the tension thickened. The faceless figure's presence was a silent challenge, a harbinger of the ideological war to come. Eliza's quiet rebellion through obscure literature, Harold's mounting anxiety, and the unseen forces gathering beyond the bureau's walls, all pointed toward a reckoning. The Bureau of Absurd Affairs had always danced on the edge of reason and nonsense, but now the music was changing. Whether they would stumble or find a new rhythm remained uncertain. For now, they braced themselves, caught in the uneasy twilight where logic met lunacy, and the fate of absurdity hung in the balance. As Eliza returned to her desk, she whispered another line from her cherished absurdist tome. A mantra against despair. In the land where the impossible is law, even shadows can teach us to see. The dance had begun, and the Bureau was ready to face the shadow that threatened to silence the music of nonsense.